Thanks for coming. This is a session about usability for site builders and administrators. And let me just start with a very blunt statement. I think the site builders user experience are currently neglected in Drupal. But I'm pretty sure we can change that. So the question is more, why should we change this? Well, first of all, I think site builders and those administrators who can actually structure their site are pretty much Drupal super user. And there's a very strange delay of the slides on my computer compared to at the back, so that's why we got stuck at the moment. And we actually need to change this also, not because the site builders are the kind of super users, but also because the fact that Drupal can be restructured so much, I think, is Drupal's unique selling point compared to lots of other systems. So let me just give you a short introduction what I mean by site builder. I think site builders are those people that build websites for others to use. So they often work in a team together with backenders, with front-end developers, with designers. They use both the core and contrib modules. They have to find and apply patches, manage configuration, and then basically prepare the site for others to use. So any user experience problems the site builder has, they either need to fix for the other users or they just kind of pass on. At the same time, the front-ender are also doing lots of kind of site building tasks, like configuring display modes, placing blocks, configuring image styles, and often also in cooperation with the site builders and the designers. And then we have the advanced administrator. So that are those people that work on the production side, that manage content and users, and they have to change not only the actual content, but also kind of UI text that is in blocks or in messages or in the automated emails. Administrators often need to be able to add or disable menu items. They have to be able to disable blocks, edit blocks. They have to change forms. And quite often they have to do that without access to actually a site builder or a themer. You don't want to call up the site builder every time you want to change the text in the welcome message to a new user when they register their account. So in the context of this talk, well, who isn't actually the kind of site builder I'm talking about? It's the kind of the first-time users. It's the people who only want to build a site in a day. I think that's a special case, and I think we really need to have a kind of different install profiles for them. So having said all that, a bit about me. Well, by my own definition, I'm a site builder. I've been working with Drupal since about 4.7, and professionally have been making websites with it since Drupal 6. So I've seen lots of changes in the UI. I'm a freelancer. I work with small teams for small organizations, and I work with the documentation working group and the usability group. So just a short question about you in the room here. Who is a site builder? Who's a more front-end developer? Who's only doing back-end? Who thinks, what the hell am I doing here? Okay, so that's a mixed bag of people. Or anybody who's only developing contrib modules? Ah, okay, one. So let's talk a bit about usability. First of all, what are the results of bad usability? Quite often it's frustration and wasted time, because you spend lots of time not finding what you want to do. It's unnecessary workarounds and kind of overcomplicating the UI or the interface, and it can also lead to security problems. If you don't know how you're actually configuring the site and kind of hack around and make things somehow work without really knowing why you changed this somewhere, that can basically create security problems. And I think this bad usability quite often comes from just not being able to find things, overlooking options. Quite often it's a lack of documentation. And because the documentation is lacking, you just assume that you know how this works or what this word might mean instead of actually knowing it. Quite often you have figured out how something works, and then the UI is so inconsistent that you don't know anymore how it works on the next page. And sometimes it's simply because the workflows are hard-coded and don't actually fit your own use case. And I think what makes good usability is not only the kind of new initiatives that we currently have in Drupal, and Drupal 8 has quite a few nice new features coming up with blocks inside out and workflows. But I think we can also make lots of good usability by actually making sure that there's consistency, that there's a clear UI, and quite often also by actually turning those kind of common hacks that lots of site builders do in actual configuration. And I'll give you a few examples like that. So, string overrides. In Drupal 7, it's a common problem that you have some text, certainly in the English UI, that doesn't quite fit what you want, and you need to change it somehow. So you can go to the settings.php file and write it in there, or there's a module called string override, or there's a kind of hack to say, we install a second custom English that we can then use to translate this English word into a different English word. And basically, in Drupal 8, that approach has been taken up. So now if you have English and you want to edit English, there's a small tick box at the bottom that allows you to actually enable all those English strings to be translated. And then you can just look for these words, and if you actually don't like the fact that the modules page is called extend, well, you just translate it. So you can actually, from the UI, now change the English UI text with this little tick box that unfortunately was undocumented for quite a while. Another good improvement, I think, is the fact that admin pages are now using views. So if you don't like this kind of standard content list that gives you the title, the content type, the author, but you need it different for your client, for your project, well, you just change it. It's a view. So if you want to show the pictures and not the author, fine. You just do that. I think that's an approach that came from lots of site builders having actually had to make admin pages in views previously. You can also change the order of the filters that are here, which if you see that, for me, that's a very inconsistent UI. The order of the, actually that's the version that I'd already changed. In the default, actually the order of the filters doesn't line up with the columns underneath. So you have first the publish date and then the title. In this example, I've actually changed it so that the title, the content type, and the publish date are in the same order as the columns underneath. And I made an issue for that this morning to fix that for Drupal 8.3, and somebody has already taken that up. So in the corner, there's always the issue number if you want to work on anything. But if you think you could actually do this, if you would like to save the whole thing or change the whole thing for the list of taxonomy terms, you find out that actually not all of the admin pages are in views yet. So this one you can't change. So I think there's still a lot of improvement to make sure that we actually make all of the admin pages using views. So if you want to show the images with your content types, with your taxonomy terms, if you want to filter them because you have something like 400 terms and you need to find a specific one, turning that into a view would be a really good idea. So I'll give you some more examples about UI problems that we have, and I think that are actually quite fixable. Quite often is you don't find pages because the page names are the same. At some stage we had, I think, 10 pages called settings in Drupal 8 core. So you remember something was on the settings page, but which one? Or some pages don't actually have a menu item. So for example, if you look for the permissions page, well, somewhere under people, it's actually a tab on the people's page, but not on the people configuration page, but actually on that people list down there, which is actually the list of users. And there's an issue for that, because one of the core maintainers actually made an issue to say, because he can never ever remember where the roles and permissions are. Currently that issue is hanging because nobody can kind of figure out whether it should go under configuration or structure. The only thing we know, it shouldn't actually be on the list of users. Another reason of not finding pages is because they don't even have a tab or a link at all. If you install the Migrate UI module, like the user interface for migrating, this is the page you get. Can anybody see where you find the Migrate UI? Well, it's that link in that message. It's the only time where you ever get a link to the page you need to go to if you want to run the migration from the user interface. I think there should be a tab or a link somewhere more prominent than this one time. Because the only other way of finding is to check the routing.yaml file. And I asked quite a few other site builders on how do you actually find admin pages when you install a new module? And that was the most common answer. I check the routing file of the module to find out where it is instead of going through all the configuration and structure subtabs. And sometimes it's difficult to find a page because actually there's like 2 pages in one. So when you're looking for the list of menu items, well, I expected if I go to the list of menus and there's the operations, and there should be the list of menu items. Well, actually you have to click on edit menu, which gives you both the editing the menu, like the name and its machine name and so forth, as well as the list of items. And when I wanted to make an issue for that just before the Dev Days in Milan, I figured out that this is actually a result of user testing, because lots of users were confused about not finding out where to how to reorder the menu items, because I didn't know that links were menu items, and therefore the idea was to put everything together. But that now means that if I want to give my users later the permission to enable and disable menu items, I also give them the permissions to rename the whole thing, which actually I don't want to. Or if I have a multilingual site, they also have the permissions to change the language settings of that, which I certainly don't want to. So what can we do to improve the usability here? Well, use proper page names, add menu items, make sure that we split the different pages between what is structure, what is configuration, and what is content. And then when we split that properly, we can also make sure that we can set the access permissions so that users really only see what they need to see. Well, finding configuration once you've found the page is another big challenge, because quite often the configuration is unclear, it's a bit hidden, it's hard-coded because somebody assumed they would know the way how users afterwards would use that module. And I'll just give you one example of that. If you want to add a term as a child term to something else, like add apple as a child term to fruit, but you have already added some other fields onto your list, onto your taxonomy terms, you get this kind of list that has different fields, images, and in between, you actually have the place where you could add that as a child term to another one, and that's collapsed little link that says relations. If you click on that, it suddenly extends and you get the list of child and parent terms. That's pretty much hidden away, and you can't even place it anywhere you want to, because it's not a field that shows up in the list of managed fields. So we have a good functionality that is completely hidden away and is beyond my control as a site builder. There are sites where I actually want to tell people straight away, you can structure these terms, but I can't build a site for my future users to actually do that. There's an issue for that as well, if anybody wants to work on that. So my question to module maintainers in that case would be, please just don't hard-code workflows. Expose all of these form elements to me, make them fields that I can reorder and hide or not show. Don't take that decision for me, that's mine as a site builder. Another problem is naming things. And according to a common quote, caching and naming things are the 2 most complicated things in software development. And I'll just give you some example from Drupal 7. Well, first of all, one problem with naming is if you use the same word, but it has different meanings. And for Drupal 7, we have an example with context. Anybody knows what context is in Drupal 7? Anybody knows the 3 different versions of what context is? Because it's, first of all, we have contextual filters in Vue, we have scald contexts, and we have the context module, all of which use the word context in different ways. The context module actually isn't really contextual at times, and but you might end up with a site that is both using Vue, scald, and the context module. And you have to figure out every time what is this word actually meaning here. And in the same way around, we have the problem then we use a different word for something that's basically the same. So when you work with groups in 7 or 8, we have members, and we either have non-members in organic groups, or we have outsiders in group. Both is basically the same. And nonetheless, both modules use a different term for that. And then sometimes we also have words where you think they're actually more meant for the developer. They might refer to their company name or for some kind of quirky joke. But actually when you name something, you really need to name it for the user. So what especially module developers can do, I think, to improve usability here is to check what other modules are doing. Because module developers might just work with their one module. As a site builder, I'm dealing with lots of modules. So I need people to actually look beyond their own module and actually strive for consistency beyond that. Unless there's a really good reason to rename something that somebody else has already named. You're doing us all a favor if you just stick to the existing name. And yeah, name them to be used, not how you want to, not for your own ego. And as if you've noticed, I'm a stickler for consistency. I'll just give you another few examples. So we have a number of list of entity types in Drupal 8. So we have content types, and you see they're listed with their name, description, and the operations. With comments, we have the same, the comment types, the description, operations. Media module does the same, name, description, operation. And then you look at taxonomies and vocabularies. They only have the name and the operation. Even so, all of the vocabularies actually have a field to describe what it's for, how it should be used. It just doesn't show up anywhere. Luckily, that has been fixed for Drupal 8.3. So now if you look at the list of vocabularies, you will also see the description. And those kind of fixes are also very easy to do. So for anybody who wants to get into improving core, those are the kind of things that can actually be easy done in a day or two of sprinting. This one has been fixed, so no. Other inconsistency, this is how do you put in a path in Drupal 8? With or without a slash in front of? Because this is the field that you get if you want to put in a link using the CK editor. And it gives you no indication. And if you look at other modules, well, it actually depends. There's lots of modules where you can put in passes for blocks, for shortcuts. And, well, for blocks, shortcuts menu, you put in a slash. For views, you don't. So how do you know as a user whether to put a slash there or not? There might be some legacy with views here, but I think in general, again, it's good to actually check what other modules are doing, making sure that the description text we have under all of these fields are actually similar. Because every time you write something different than the other module has already done it, means that the translators have to translate the whole thing differently. And I think we can actually, if we make text easier to translate, it also means it's much more usable for people using the sites in other languages than English. So for consistency, I think we really have to follow the defaults as they are. Defaults don't necessarily have to be the best way of doing things, they just have to be an agreed way of doing things. Like, we have a number of characters that you use for a line of code. That might not be the perfect number for a line of code, but it's the one that, as a Drupal community, we have agreed on. And that's the kind of default I think we can also take up in other issues. You can always choose to things differently than the default, but then do that consciously and with a good reason. And as a whole community together, I think we also really need to develop and actually promote UI standards. We have naming structures for functions and things like that, But we have no naming structure for how to call a page, or whether the page and the tab should be the same or not. So I think that's a thing we still have we should have, there's lots of work to be done on that. Documentation is another issue where I think we can improve a lot. First of all, there's lots of modules that actually don't have any documentation. Or sometimes we have documentation, but it's just in the wrong place. So if you look at different help texts, the first two images are actually from the module page where you enable modules. They have information about what blocks are, or they have information on how to disable database default examples. That shouldn't be on the page where you actually enable something. And sometimes the admin pages are also just not the place to try to explain a whole concept. I think the other example from rules in Drupal 7, I don't think it's possible to explain rules in 1.5 sentence on an admin page. So you can actually look at it with a bit more distance, in a bit more structured way. We have documentation on help texts in kind of 3 different levels. We have the kind of, what do I need to actually understand the concept of this module? Hopefully I only need to read that once, and that should be on the help page or the online documentation. Then we have kind of help texts that are a bit more reminder, that you might need to read a few times, and then you actually know how the page works. And that should go on the admin page at the top. And then you have the kind of the short help that gives you the right format in which to put something in there, or what this tick box actually is for. And that's the kind of help you need every time actually you use a form or configuration. So that needs to go into the labels and the actual help text underneath the field. So I think with a guidance like that, we can actually redo lots of the help and documentation texts that come with modules. Because if a page is overloaded with too much text, people in the end don't read it. So we need to find a balance of actually just giving that information where you need it, as well as the proper explanation of the concept of this whole module. So what can we do to improve documentation and help text? Well, first of all, document things, especially document those kind of functionality that is nice and hidden, like the tick box about being able to translate English to English. That was undocumented. It's such a great tool, it should be visible. And if you take the effort to write a module with functionality or patch a module with adding functionality, that should be documented. It's just a waste if people don't know that it's there. For help text, we actually have some standards, so you can follow them. And from the documentation working group, there's also help available if anybody wants their text to be reviewed. And strangely enough, reduce the number of text that is on the pages. Reduce it to what is necessary. And then I want to go into the bigger picture because sometimes we actually can't find things because there's just too much on a Drupal site. I'll just give you an example from a site I built this summer where we had a role of an editor and I really only needed to deal with the content. So I could make them a nice clean list where they would only have the content and the files they needed to work with. And then they figured out that actually they also needed to edit some of the blocks that we put on the page, like the block with the contact details, with the time when they would be available. So I just changed the permissions to let them edit content blocks. And suddenly the admin interface looked like this. Because you cannot actually, you can only enable access to structure, config, and help together. Even if you only want your users to use one single page in the structure, under structure, you have to give them the whole config menu with all these sub-menu items, and every single one they would click on would say, you don't have any configuration menu items, but still it's there. And when they then find the block layout page, they then need to click on the tab that says custom block library before they then can find the edit button to edit their blocks. So I think that's an example of we actually need to change something about the admin UI to make it easier to actually find our way through this admin interface, not only for us, but also for the people for whom we're building the websites. So we've been discussing lots of that at the Drupal Dev Days in Milan last summer, and lots of it came down to this kind of approach of, I just want to have everything together. I don't want to search for a bit of something is in structure here and then the content is there. So that's why we have the taxonomy terms, which are content under structure. But when you look at it, this I want everything together from the module developer's point of view actually leads, in case of blocks, to something like this. We first come onto the block layout page, which, well, is pretty much about site building and theming. You place your blocks, you place them per theme, you can configure them, like whether they have a title or not. So that's pretty much all site building tasks and theming tasks. But when you click on this tab up there, it brings you to the custom block library, which actually is only content creation and content editing. That's a completely different task. It's quite often also a completely different user doing that. This needs to be accessed on the live site. Well, the first page actually doesn't, or shouldn't in most cases. And then you have actually a secondary tab on here, which says blocks and block types. So if you click on block types, it actually brings you back to another page that both has site building, like configuring different custom blocks, and theming them. So basically, under one menu item, we go from site building to content creation to site building again, and all of that kind of bundled together on 3 levels with only one single menu item. So what do we do with this? And we have been discussing this for the last few months with several people, and very brutally, we came up with the proposal to just reorganize the whole admin interface. So not actually trying to find a differentiation between structure and configuration, but trying to reorganize it more based on personas, based on the use. Is this page to be used on a live site or only on the development site? Is this used by the content creator or is this used by the front-ender, themer? And we could actually come up with a simple set of questions that if you go through that, you would actually know where to put all of these pages. So we would end up with a much more structured admin interface where later I could actually say, okay, this is the production side. The people working on it are working on content. And you only see the content, and you don't need to see the structure, and you don't need to see the help or anything. There's an issue for that, and that is currently on the ideas queue for Drupal 8 or maybe Drupal 9. So to summarize all of this, we need to actually improve lots of the modules with the tools we currently have by improving the text, making sure that different views are consistent with each other. We have to pay a lot of attention to naming things to the UI texts. We should really look beyond the individual modules and not just have a tunnel vision on my module does this. And as a whole community, we have to develop UI standards for modules. And all of you are invited to actually join us on working on UX issues. No. There should be actually a picture. There's a special website that actually only has the Drupal usability issues. And we have a weekly, or actually 2 weekly phone calls, not phone calls, IRC meetings or Google Hangouts, where we are actually discussing usability issues, both on Tuesday evenings and Wednesday mornings to make sure we get people from the different time zones. So if you're interested in improving usability, come sprint with us, join those calls, check the usability issues, or if you build a site and you think, gosh, this is really annoying, I have to change that every single time, then make an issue for it, and then we can fix that. So these are the issues I've mentioned, if anybody wants to work on them. And Now it's time for ideas, questions, discussions. Thanks. Any questions? Yes, please. Yeah, there's a microphone only standing there, or I can repeat your question.
Yeah?
Yeah, that sounds.
So, can I ask about some common workflow for usual editor? In Drupal 7, when I'm creating a node and adding that content in a menu, and I want to specify position of that item, I am creating node and adding it to the menu with horrible interface, and I need to go on the menu edit and edit order of the things to put it in the right spot. Is it done differently in Drupal 8 or?
I think, unfortunately, not. I think you can still give the weight when you you create a content issue that should go into the menu, a content item that should go into the menu. But that only works if you actually have an idea how all the other ones are.
Which is basically useless for.
So no, that's still a drag and drop task you'll have to do. And that's also a typical task, which I think, for example, is a task for a content creator.
Yeah.
Which is why menu items are actually content. They don't go into configuration. So there should also be something that is more listed under content, where people can actually access them on a live site. And yeah, also because they're not going into actual configuration. So no, unfortunately at the moment, I think you still need to drag and drop things around. And I'm not sure anybody is working on a better way of doing that at the moment.
Thank you.
However, thinking of workflow, if in Drupal 8.3, there will actually be much more of workflow for being able to stage content. To say, okay, this content has been written, but needs still to be reviewed by somebody. So there's at least improvement on that level. Any other questions, ideas, annoyances?
So if you have this incredibly long menu, and you have to drag one menu link, sometimes even to the next page, when you list the menu, then things start getting very confusing. Is that maybe solved in Drupal 8?
No, there is, however,
something like perhaps collapsible previews.
There's one way of doing that because you can actually turn on and off the drag and drop option. There's a link at the top of the menu where you can say that you want to actually either have the drag and drop or you want to see the actual weight. So if you want to move a menu item from position 2 to position 28, it's easier to actually turn off the drag and drop, see what the number should be, and just change the number. And I think in most cases, sites where the list of menu item goes over 2 pages or so, there's probably something also not so good with the actual information architecture of the site itself. But if you have very long menus, try out the turning off the drag and drop. Just remember to turn it back on, because otherwise it won't work anywhere else either.
Okay, I understand what you said. I didn't mean the long menus, but the hierarchy is very deep. So when you preview this menu with drag and drop options, then the page gets really long.
I think there again, if you turn off the drag and drop and move it with the weight, that might be easier. That's again is a kind of functionality that is kind of, it's there, but not very visible. I think people tend to overlook the fact that you can actually can turn that off.
Hi. I have a question about the documentation and README file in Drupal 8. I'm pretty new in Drupal society, so is there a chance to, I don't know, use a markdown format in some cases, or as a document, as a standard for writing documentation, README file?
At the moment, the help text, the kind of the text that shows up on the help page, is actually placed in the actual module, and therefore follows basically it's HTML marked text inside the PHP file. So there is discussion on actually changing the whole help system, because it also means that the help text currently can only be read once you have installed the module. You can't read the help text before the module has been enabled to find out whether you actually want this module. So there's some discussion on maybe changing that, maybe moving the help out of that module text into a YAML file, and some other ideas. There's an issue for that with kind of ongoing discussion on how to move on, because that help text is really, it was already like that with Drupal 4, I remember. And it's now, yes, complicated because we actually have markdown in the module file, and it puts a very big hurdle onto also people to just say, okay, I just help with improving that text. So, no, but at the moment, there hasn't been any decision on that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Ideas how you would like to have Drupal working instead of how it's working now? Anybody who wants to work on some issues tomorrow? Okay, I think then we are perfectly in time. And thank you all for coming. And thanks a lot.